Okay, this identification is on a large event in U.S. history called the Great Depression. And so this is one of the required lectures to view. So the Great Depression is from 1929 to approximately 1939. It was the worst economy in U.S. history. It began with the stock market crash in 1929, which wiped out millions and millions of dollars in investments, and a tremendous amount of loss was taken in the stock market. Uh, this was this actually occurred at a time when President Hoover was president um, at, in 1929. So the Great Crash, they call it, or the stock market crash of 29, was the event that actually began the Great Depression. You can see this newspaper headline: billions lost as stocks crash. So before this shows that Roosevelt ended up winning presidency because of the nightmare of the Great Depression. But before going into Roosevelt, I'd like to cover the problems that were occurring at the time of the Great Depression. Not only did the wealthy lose all their money, but millions and millions of Americans lost their jobs. So there were lines for food, and the unemployment in some cities was 8 out of 10 people, 80%. It depended on the city. So it was a huge crisis, and it didn't just go on a few weeks. It went on year after year after year. And as you should know from the Hoover um, identification, he did very little to address the problems. It's not that he could have stopped the depression from happening, but he created very few programs to address the problems, and so people wanted to turn for a big change. So they elected Franklin Roosevelt in a landslide. We can see here uh, one line of many for it says free soup for the unemployed. So uh, virtually there were lines like this all across America, and many times people, stores and organizations were trying to help people without any government help, but it was so overwhelming for the government that it's so overwhelming for the people of America that turning to private charity was not enough. So ultimately, the Great Depression, the biggest problem it caused was the loss of jobs. And so unemployment grew. It basically soared. Factories closed. Farms went out of business. There was a tremendous growth in homelessness. And there were very few government safety nets in place at the time. And this continued for the 4 years of Hoover, um, hoping that there would be some kind of change, but Hoover just basically was overwhelmed. Um, and so, because of these lines across the country, Americans decided to vote for change, and they turned to Franklin Roosevelt, and they elected him in 1932. You can see here another viewpoint of that line. Um, but like I said, this was in every city, small towns, big towns. Um, Here you see what was called a shanty town. For a while, they were named Hoovervilles, kind of derisively attaching President Hoover's name to the homelessness. So, but also Shannon. These were makeshift towns across the country for those who had become homeless because of unemployment. And up until Roosevelt won, basically there was very little help for people, and for to turn to for food or for housing. So that this headline shows Franklin Roosevelt. It says Roosevelt promises national relief, and a lot of this chapter in the book really covers what were the programs that uh, were enacted during Roosevelt's presidency, also known as the New Deal. So that's basically a summary of it. Even but when Roosevelt became president, the problem still persisted for another quite a few more years. But at least Roosevelt started to create programs to help individuals survive. We'll cover more on that later.